Demo Nugget, Cloud SQL Instances. Hello everybody, this is Ben Finkel, and in this nugget, we're going to demonstrate how you can create new instances using both the developer's console inside of your web browser, as well as the G-Cloud SDK from a command line. It's very easy to do. So let's start by taking a look at the console, the developer's console web user interface for creating and maintaining instances. I'm going to go ahead and open up cloud.google.com inside of our web browser and follow along with the Getting Started nugget. If you hadn't, to get your account set up and your project created, you're going to click Go to My Console up here on the top, and then you're going to choose your project. In our case, it's going to be GSQL Nuggets. I'm going to scroll down on the left-hand side here to Storage and choose Cloud SQL. This is where I can do all my Google Cloud SQL work. Now, since I don't have any instances yet, the only option I have here is to create an instance, and it's as easy as clicking this button, Create an Instance. So a couple of points about the options that I have up on screen right now. There's three basic options that we need to provide in order to create an instance. The first is our instance ID, and you'll notice that it's prefixed by our project ID with a colon. So we can give our instance ID any name we'd like. It doesn't have to be unique outside of our project. It only has to be unique within our project. So I can go ahead and call it my-instance. You'll notice that it's got to be lowercase. It can only have dashes in it. If I try to add any special characters like a colon, it's going to tell me what I've done wrong. So my-instance is going to work. The second two options I have here are the region and the tier. The region is just what it sounds like, a geographical region where my database is going to be located. In what geographical region, what data center do I want this database to be created in? So I can choose the United States, the European Union, or Asia. And the idea here is to pick something that is going to be geographically close to whatever third-party outside consumer of your database you're going to have. That way you can reduce the latency between your third-party connectivity and your database as much as possible. The third option here is to choose the tier of the database that I want to create. And these are the available tiers, the sizes of database that you can create. You'll notice that they're listed by the amount of RAM, the amount of volatile memory available to that database. Every tier comes with an appropriate amount of CPU power behind it. And if you're using per package or per day billing, then every tier also includes a set amount of IOPS and storage space. And you can review all that in the pricing documentation. I'm going to go ahead and create a D0. This is the smallest, cheapest level of database that I can create. After I do that, I just click Save, and you can see that it's going to start creating my database. It'll say that right over here, status being created. And when it's done, it just takes a few minutes. It's going to say status runnable. And the reason that it says status runnable and not status running is because of a feature called the activation policy of the instance. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. If you want to review some details of your Cloud SQL instances, of course you can see the basic details right here on the main Cloud SQL dashboard, we'll call this. I have the option to create more new instances if I'd like. I can also see a listing of all the instances that I have. And here is my first instance that I just created a moment ago, called My Instance. I see the ID there. The tier, if I assigned it an IP address, I can see its external IP address. I can see how much storage out of my available 250 gigabytes I'm using, also what region it's in, and if it's runnable or actually physically running at this time. I can get more details of this instance simply by clicking on the instance ID. You'll see that's a hyperlink. And when I select it, I'm brought to the instance dashboard. The instance dashboard has a lot of different options. Let's talk through them. For starters, up here at the top, I can edit the details of my instance by clicking the Edit button. I also have the option to import or export my database. We'll cover those in a different nugget. And if you need to, you can click this Restart button to restart the database, or you can click the Delete button to delete the database. If you no longer need this instance, you can delete it. That'll save you some money. And of course, you can also create a read replica with this button up here. That is a read-only replica of the database that you can use to propagate it out to other regions or other zones or even other hosting centers. Below that, we've got our overview panel, and this starts with just a graph of some of the different metrics of our database. You'll see you can pull down a lot of different metrics to review. This comes from the Cloud Monitoring API, so I can see my read-write operations, and I can look at the past hour, the past 6 hours, 7 days, all the way up to 30 days worth of details on my database for any of these different metrics. So if you need to understand what's going on with your database, this is a nice, quick tool to help you look at your database and figure out what is actually happening. Below that is just a listing of some of the stuff that is set currently on your database, what its IP addresses are, what version, region, the backup window, etc. If you have any backups, it'll tell you right over here on the backups page, and that's where you can restore backups from. Let's go ahead and take a look at the advanced options that you can use when you create a new database instance. I'm going to go back to my main panel here, click New Instance, and I'm going to call this a D1 instance, because guess what? I'm going to make it a tier D1. But now I'm going to click this little Show Advanced Options link right here. This is going to expand a whole bunch of additional options for creating the database for me. Let's take a look at them. First, I've got my database version, and you'll notice we have 5.5 and also 5.6, which is in preview mode. That's kind of a beta testing, limited beta testing that Google exposes. So maybe by the time you're watching this nugget, 5.6 is out and released, and you can choose a 5.6 database. But for now, the only production version available is MySQL 5.5. Below that is your billing plan. Here's your per use or your package billing. And you'll notice each of these is set for the default. So if I didn't highlight these or if I didn't change them when I created a basic database, these defaults are what they are going to be set with. The per use billing plan is just like it sounds like. It's 10 cents per hour while the instance is running. And note once again, I'm going to refer to that status. Runnable does not count as running. Only running counts as running. You can also pay for the package billing plan, which is for this D1 instance a $1.46 charge per day. So the package billing plan, if you take a look at the pricing documentation, allows you to pay for a full day at a time, regardless of whether you are running for 1 hour or 8 hours during that day. But you get some included storage, you get some included IOPS, and ultimately, if your database is expected to be up and running a lot of the time, the package billing plan is going to be a little bit cheaper than the per use billing plan. Below that, we have our preferred location, in which we can set to no preference, compute engine zone, or follow app engine. So if I tell it to follow an app engine app, what it's actually going to do is within the geographic regions, within the zones available to the Google Cloud Platform products, this database is going to move along with that app engine app. So that app engine app may be migrated from zone to zone without my intervention automatically in the back end based on load balancing, performance metrics, that kind of thing. So if I tell my database to follow that app engine app is always going to have a nice high-speed, low-latency connection to this database. Same thing if I choose a compute engine zone. If I choose a compute engine zone, I can make sure that this database stays inside one of these zones that is close to my compute engine instances to provide a nice low-latency connection to any of my compute engine instances. I'm going to go ahead and leave this at no preference. Below that here, I can choose my backup time. All you have to choose for backups is whether or not you want them enabled and what time frame you want them to. And you can choose any 1 hour period over 24 hours. Backups will get run every day in that time frame. Next, we have the activation policy for our database. And this is what I've been talking about, the difference between runnable and running. By default, your databases are activated on demand. You can see right here, this instance will be turned on to handle incoming connections and shut down after a few minutes of inactivity. So when your database is runnable, it's not actually running. The first request or the first connection that comes into your database is going to cause it to spin up, to start up. So that connection may be a little bit slower than future connections where the database is already running. Then once again, once those connections stop coming in, if the database is inactive for a few minutes, it's actually going to spin down. It's going to shut itself down. This can save you a lot of money because obviously you don't need your database running if there are no active connections. Of course, because of that performance issue with that first connection spinning up, you might want to choose always on. This means that the instance will never be shut down. As long as you have it created, it's running, it's costing you money. I got to tell you, you probably only want to use always on if you're using the package billing plan. You don't want to use the per use billing plan and leave your database always on. You also have the option to choose never and turn your database off if you need it turned down for any reason. Probably only a temporary state. If you really don't need your database anymore, take an export of it, get a backup of it, and just delete the database entirely. Then we have file system replication. You have a choice between synchronous and asynchronous. This is because your database is actually being replicated across zones for you. That's how you get your durability and your persistence and your fault tolerance in your database. But what that means is you have a potential for different versions of your database to be out of sync with one another. So if you choose synchronous, that means that your writes are going to take a little bit longer because it has to write to every version of the database before that data is available. But any crash or any fault that happens, you're not going to lose any data that you've called committed. If you need faster writes for whatever reason, you can choose an asynchronous replication method, which means that it's going to write a lot faster because it's just going to write to one database, then move on to the next and write to that one. But you might lose a few seconds of updates in the instance of a crash if it happens to crash while it's written to one database but not the next one. The last few options deal with access to your database from outside connections. First, you have the option to assign this database an IPv4 address. This is going to give it an external static address that you can use to connect to it from really any outside third-party client, your desktop, client applications, whatever you might need. You can also choose authorized networks using CEDAR notation. And what you're going to need to do there is you're going to need to whitelist any IPs that you want to allow to have access to this database or to connect to this database. So if you give it an IPv4 address, that's not enough. You also need to make sure that you whitelist the addresses where these connections are coming in from in order to allow access to read and write from this database. Now, all of that is untrue if you want to access it from an App Engine application. And in this case, you can actually add App Engine applications that are already inside a Google Cloud Platform that want to connect to this database. And if they're in this list, then they will by default have access to it, and they don't actually need the IP address or the network authorization. They get their authorization from this little setting here. The last setting, MySQL flags, allow you to set a couple of different variables or values on the MySQL database itself. These are some advanced settings for different log output and SQL mode. We'll cover those in a different nugget, but this is where you can set them during database creation if you'd like to. Once you've done all that, click the Save button, and once again this will start creating my database. You can see it up here. Again, it's being created, and when it's done, its status should be runnable. Of course, working in the web browser with the web UI is not the only way to create and manage instances. We can also use the gcloud SDK from our command line. That's the gcloud tool right here from our terminal window. So I'm going to go ahead and fire this up, and if you followed along with the Getting Started nugget, you should already be set up and connected with your gcloud SDK. So anything I can do in the web UI, I can also duplicate down here from my terminal command prompt. So for instance, if I call gcloud SQL instances list, I'm going to get the same list of instances inside of my project that I have here on the left. You can see that I've got my two instances listed, D1 in my instance, same as over here, D1 in my instance, and all the same information, the region, the tier, the address, and the status. So anything that you can do inside of the web UI, you can do with gcloud, and it's a fairly easy program to use. By and large, the structure of the commands are always going to be gcloud SQL resources action. The actions tend to be list, create, remove, and describe. Those tend to be the four actions that you run into. And the resources, at least in the Cloud SQL, are almost always going to be instances. So we can do a gcloud SQL instances describe and just pass in the name of an instance that I want to describe. Let's describe d1-instance. When I call that command, I'm going to get a big, long, verbose description of my instance. I'll just scroll up here over this real quick. You can run this to yourself to see all the different information that you get out of your describe statement. But this is essentially the equivalent of clicking on that instance and looking at the details of it inside of the web UI. So again, gcloud SQL resource action. If you want to know all of the features or options that are available to you when you're using gcloud, there is a wealth of documentation available online. Just go ahead and Google search for gcloud SDK documentation. You can find all about it. But you can also get familiar with the -- help command switch, and you use that by simply calling gcloud, let's say SQL instances create -- help. What this is going to do is this is going to give me a nice verbose help listing of all the options, all the flags that I can use with the create action. So you see here, these are all of the details that we were able to choose in the advanced options when I was creating the instance in the web UI. I can choose my tier or my replication strategy, my backup start time, etc. So using this information, if I wanted to create a D2 tier database, I would simply get back to my command prompt and type gcloud SQL instances create. I have to give it a name. I'll call it D2 instance, and then -- tier D2. Oops, D2. Wait for that to run, and when that's finished running, I can go back and look at my web UI, and I can see that I created a D2 instance. So after a few minutes, there it is, listed both in my command line prompt as well as in my web user interface, along with my other instances that I had created. Now once again, all of this documentation for the command line utility is available online. If you simply browse to cloud.google.com, whack SDK, whack gcloud, whack reference, you can see a full listing of the entire gcloud tool for all the components of Google Cloud Platform that it works with, but including the gcloud SQL commands that you might be interested in. That concludes this demonstration nugget on creating Cloud SQL instances. We took a look at how you can create Cloud SQL instances both in the web UI as well as in the command line interface, and how we can set the advanced options for all of the different features that we can turn on, enable, disable, and configure for our Google Cloud SQL instances. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.